watching Dante's Boxing Nation. Woo! Hey.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? You know, this is pretty interesting because I said a couple weeks, I guess a little bit before the Terrence Crawford versus Victor Postol fight, I said that this year will be remembered for a couple different reasons. One reason is this year will be remembered for crowning the undisputed pound-for-pound champion once Sergey Kovalev faces off with Andre Ward on November 19th. Now, we've had disputed pound-for-pound champions such as Andre Ward, who is pound-for-pound the best fighter in the world right now because there's no fighter that has a better resume than he does. But we haven't had an undisputed pound-for-pound champion since Floyd Mayweather retired. But we will have a new one once again in November when Sergey Kovalev faces off with Andre Ward. So this year will be known for the battle of supremacy. This year will also be known for the David and Goliath year. We've seen Canelo Alvarez go up against Amir Khan, and later on we're going to see Gennady Golovkin go up against Kell Brook. The last thing this year will be known for is USA versus the former Soviet Union, or you can call it the former Eastern European countries. And the reason why I say that is because this year alone there have been a lot of American versus Eastern European fights that have taken place. The two biggest ones that stand out, of course, are Crawford versus Postol, and later on, Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev. But I'm going to get a little deeper into all the fights that took place in a minute. But the first thing I want to do is address what Roy Jones Jr. just recently said. Now, as you guys know, I just reported what Andre Ward actually had to say about this topic, yesterday or a couple days ago. Andre Ward, he was basically saying that the Eastern European countries, they're basically trying to come over, or he said they're on our turf and they're trying to take what we have. Now, that's what Andre Ward said a couple days ago. Now, this is what Roy Jones had to say. Quote, "We are now just not as good as the other countries. The Eastern countries, they started at 10 years old with kids and they have schools for boxing. We have schools for basketball, other sports, but we don't have boxing schools. So how are you going to keep up when those kids are going to school every day boxing from age 10 until Olympic time? You're not going to keep up. And so eventually these other fighters are going to surpass you. Their boxing teams as a whole are better than ours. Why? Because everybody has run over there teaching an amateur program." End quote. Now let me explain the many reasons why I totally disagree with Roy Jones' assessment when it comes to this comparison. First of all, Roy Jones, he talked about the fighters over there starting early in boxing schools at a young age. And he says over here in America, these boxers, they don't have a boxing school dedicated to boxing at age 10. Now, what makes that statement so ironic is Roy Jones Jr. himself, he didn't go to any boxing school. And Roy Jones Jr., he damn near won the gold medal in the Olympics. He was the best fighter in his division, and he got cheated of the gold medal. Floyd Mayweather Jr., Sugar Ray Leonard, Errol Spence, Andre Ward, Bernard Hopkins, Pernell Whitaker, Muhammad Ali, Sugar Ray Robinson. So from inception to present day, none of those fighters, those American fighters that won gold medals in the Olympics, that were dominant in the pro rankings, none of them ever had to go to some school that was dedicated to boxing at age 10, and they were still dominant in the sport of boxing. Now that's the first thing. Something else I want to point out is, now I read this article on boxingscene.com. What's really interesting is how the writer actually titles the article. The writer's name is Edward Chakosky, all right? Now, he titles this article, Roy Jones Explains Why Eastern Europe is Surpassing America. Now, coincidentally, I was just telling you guys, matter of fact, I brought it up a couple times. I was just telling you guys in my Andre Ward video that when I was watching the Victor Postal Crawford fight, there was a writer who was sitting about 2 seats away from me, and he was talking about how Eastern European fighters are taking over and American fighters are on the decline. Now, before I completely debunk that theory with stats and facts, let me explain to you guys, just in case you don't know, why Roy Jones had a Russian flag wrapped around him at the beginning of the video, why Roy Jones was taking pictures with Vladimir Putin. The reason is because Roy Jones, he actually became a Russian citizen, okay? Now, most of the fans knew that, but that information was for the fans that obviously didn't know. Okay, so moving on. Listen, there is no doubt that there has become an emergence of Eastern European fighters that are very good. But at the same time, there has also been an emergence of Cuban fighters as well. But no one is talking about them because they don't have the complexion for the protection. But let's just talk about the Eastern European fighters for now, since that is the main topic. Once again, I want to reiterate, the Eastern European fighters are very good fighters. And there's no doubt about it, those are going to be some of the toughest opponents for fighters coming up if you have to face an Eastern European fighter. Why? Because the majority of those Eastern European fighters, they've been fighting at the amateur ranks all the way up until they were about 25 to 30 years old. So when they turn pro, they already have about 200 to 400 fights under their belt, which means they have an enormous amount of experience already. Now, there's something else that needs to be cleared up, is there is a difference from amateur fighting and professional fighting. And there have been a lot of fighters that had a hard time making that transition over to the pro rankings. So even though having a lot of amateur fights, a lot of times it will enhance your experience, that doesn't always guarantee that you're going to be a dominant fighter, or at least the same type of dominant fighter that you were in the amateur rankings. And that goes for any country, American, Russian, whatever country, that applies. So when it comes to these Eastern European countries, quote unquote, surpassing American fighters, let's look at some of the key fights that took place this year that pinned America versus an Eastern European country. You have Ivan Redkach, who was dominated just a couple weeks ago against American Tevin Farmer. Then you have Robchenko, who was knocked out a couple weeks against American Tony Harrison. But the most important fight out of all of those fights is the one that we are going to watch on November 19th. That is the gold medal match, and that is Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev. Now, one thing you guys will notice is out of all of those fights that I named, those were all 50-50 fights. I didn't pick a fight where, Tevin Farmer, he was fighting against some Russian guy who had about 5 losses and he had just been knocked out or just came off of a loss. No. All of those fights that I mentioned, those were 50-50 fights where both fighters had a similar record. In fact, in a couple of those fights, the Eastern European fighter, he was favored to win the fight. Now, don't get me wrong, don't get the message construed, because I'm not trying to suggest an American fighter will always beat a good Eastern European fighter, because that's not the case. Once again, you have Lomachenko who beat Gary Russell Jr. But the point that I'm making is, when you say Eastern Europeans are taking over, the burden of proof is on the person who says that. All I have to do is show you a list of very significant fights where an American actually beat an Eastern European fighter. Because once you say Eastern Europeans are surpassing Americans, now you have to explain why this many of them actually lost and why some of them are losing at the highest level. Once again, like Victor Postal, right? So if we go off of that logic, then if you really think about it, any fan that supports this notion that Eastern Europeans are surpassing Americans, that puts more pressure on them to get that Kovalev win over Andre Ward. Another point I want to make when it comes to this USA versus former Soviet Union rivalry. When you look at Andre Ward and you see Andre Ward move up to a higher weight class where he's most likely going to be at a power and a size disadvantage against one of the hardest punchers in the sport and pound for pound, one of the best fighters in the world, Sergey Kovalev. If you ask the majority of experts, professional trainers, boxers, all the way from them, all the way down to the decafs on the internet, deep down, the majority of them, they would pick Andre Ward to beat the bigger, stronger Sergey Kovalev. Why? Because we've seen fighters like Floyd Mayweather, who is not the strongest puncher, beat guys way stronger than him his entire career. We've seen Pernell Whitaker do it. Pernell Whitaker was one of the first fighters to actually back Julio Cesar Chavez up. And Pernell Whitaker was known for having very little power. In fact, if you compare Pernell Whitaker's power to Floyd Mayweather, it made Floyd Mayweather look like he was a power puncher. Okay, now with all of that being said, let's get back to the point. Andre Ward can move up in weight, fight against the biggest, baddest fighter in that division that coincidentally happens to be a Russian fighter, right? Who would be the favorite in that fight? Once again, according to the experts, the trainers, the professional boxers, even the most racist fans that hate Andre Ward's guts, if they were forced to bet and they had to really put some serious money on the line, I can pretty much guarantee you the majority of them would pick Andre Ward to win this fight. Okay? So now we know that Ward would be the betting favorite. Now let's put Gennady Golovkin in Andre Ward's shoes. Now I ask you the same question, or I'm going to ask you a question. If Gennady Golovkin were to do the same thing that Andre Ward is attempting to do right now, which is move up to a higher weight class and fight against the American Andre Ward, who do you think would be favored to win that fight? We already know the answer. We already know that Andre Ward, he would be a favorite over Gennady Golovkin. So you have an American fighter that would most likely be favored to beat Gennady Golovkin, even if he has a small advantage over him, And he would also be favored to beat an Eastern European fighter who has natural advantages over him. You see where I'm going with this? Now let me ask you this question. Let's say Floyd Mayweather and Gennady Golovkin were naturally the exact same size. And we're not talking about the 40-year-old Floyd Mayweather. We're talking about the Floyd Mayweather in his prime that knocked out Diego Corrales. American fighter versus Eastern European fighter Gennady Golovkin. Who wins that fight? That is such an easy question, you don't even have to think about the answer. Do you? And furthermore, because I'm talking a lot about Andre Ward, but then you have to look at all the other American fighters. Once again, there are a lot of good Eastern European fighters, there are a lot of good Cuban fighters, and there are a lot of good American fighters. Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, Keith Thurman, Erickson Lubin, the Charlo brothers, Demetrius Andrade, Julian Rock Williams. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And when it comes to that PBC stable, I'm telling you, Al Heyman, he's got some serious ass lions coming up. That's one of the cool things about watching the Al Heyman card. If you ever get a chance to watch a PBC card live and it's in your town, go check it out. Because a lot of those fighters that fight before the TV fights come on, they will be some of the best prospects in the country. Al Heyman has a lot of very, very good undefeated prospects. Another name I forgot to mention, or a couple names, Gervonta Tank Davis, Robert Easter Jr., Caleb Plant. Some more really good American prospects that are climbing up in the rankings right now. But at the end of the day, this is the reason why every sport has a finals, a Super Bowl, a gold medal match. Because there can be a whole lot of teams out there and a whole lot of good teams. But there's only going to be one team or one fighter that can win the Super Bowl, the gold medal match. And for boxing, that gold medal match is Andre Ward versus Sergey Kovalev. That's all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.